Good morning, this is Robert Hafey, and this morning I'm going to interview Denise Baran Unland.
I'm Denise Baran Unland. I'm the features editor at the Herald News, and I'm the author of the Bryony series, a self-published author. It's a trilogy. It's a spin-off series of chapter books, and it's also a spin-off series of children's books, and it's a fundraising cookbook.
So Denise, Boomhood is a book about growing up in the 60s. And back then we had free-range childhoods, which meant we did a lot of trial and error learning. And I understand your childhood was a little different. So tell us about it. Go.
Well, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and I had a free-range childhood in the sense that my imagination could freely roam. I grew up very asthmatic, so I spent a lot of time indoors with air conditioning. Our house was one of the first on the block to have air conditioning, and I read a lot, and I mean a lot.
So it sounds like you were reading at an early age. What types of books did you read, and what attracted you to those types of books? And then how did that influence you as the writer you are today?
Well, one thing that I read quite a bit of are my mother's books. She had her childhood books on the shelves, so when I would run out of books to read, I went to hers. And she, because she was born in 1935, the books from her childhood were from the early 1900s. So I grew up reading the Bobbsey Twins and Louisa May Alcott and the Campfire Girls and stories like that. So it influenced my writing because it gave me an appreciation for stories about children in different time periods.
So that's interesting that you read the books off your mother's shelf. And how did that reading influence you as a writer today, and where did that Bryony series come from?
Well, the series came from a couple of things. One is, of course, I always had a desire to write a book of my own because I had read so many books. I like stories about the supernatural, and somewhere along the line, I got hooked on vintage vampire stories. And there's a bit of subtle romanticism and subtle horror to a lot of those stories. I wanted to write one myself, and I wanted to make it a story that girls would enjoy reading. So I think all of those elements of stories I enjoyed in my childhood influenced the series.
I've noticed when people talk about things they're passionate about, their eyes sparkle. Or if you're as old as me and have had cataract surgery, your eyes sparkle because you have plastic lenses. But yours did for a different reason. Why is that? Tell me about your passion for writing.
I like a good story, and I like telling a good story. We tell family stories. I love telling the stories of other people that are inspiring for the feature section of the Herald News. And the Bryony series is a good story. You know, the basic premise is a 70s teen who falls in love with a Victorian vampire, and where it sounds like it's been done in Twilight, it hasn't. It's not that type of a story. I had the idea in 1985, and she's really falling in love with the veneer of, as I said before, kind of the attractive romanticism of another era, and not paying close attention to what's behind it.
So Denise, even though I write nonfiction and you write fiction, I think all writers or creative type people have a lot in common. What are some of those commonalities that you observe?
Well, first of all, I do write nonfiction too. Obviously, for the newspaper, I've written about you, and that wasn't fiction. But I think the commonality between all writers is we like to play with words. And we like to think about them and ponder them and put them in a way that people will enjoy reading them, learning from what we have to say, being entertained, being moved, and we can spend hours working with words and finding the right words and the right phrases. And I think all writers have that in common.
Denise, I'd really like to thank you for being here today and helping me understand how reading as a child has taken you on a personal journey to being the writer you are today. How would someone get in contact with you or purchase copies of your books?
You can find copies of my books on my website, which is bryonyseries.com, BRYONY series.com, and every book I've written is on the main page.